Welcome to the online information session on the draft operating plan and budget for the coming 21-22 financial year. Sorry, time's moving past quickly. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to their ancestors and spirits past and present. I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal persons who join us today. This afternoon we have Darren Good, Council's Senior Accountant, joining me. Darren is stepping in for Margaret Palmer, who unfortunately was ill today and unable to join us. Darren is the powerhouse behind our accounting team and knows the accounts in a great deal of detail, and will be able to assist me with any detailed questions, as well as going through some of the more detailed slides this evening. The purpose of today's session is to explain the draft plan and provide an opportunity for you to ask any questions, potentially to support or inform any submissions that you may wish to make and provide back to Council prior to Council adopting its final operating plan and budget for the forthcoming financial year. Just some minor housekeeping matters before we get started on the presentation itself. The session is being recorded and will be made available on Council's website. All participants' microphones will be muted throughout the session. If you are participating via a computer or smart device, you can use the chat function to submit a question during the session, and we'll try to answer them at the end. We do have several questions that were submitted in advance. After our presentation, we will respond to those questions. However, if we run out of time this evening, we do have to move on. There's further Council briefings after this evening. And if we're unable to answer all the questions, we will endeavour to respond either via email to the person asking the question or via the facts sheet, which will be posted on our webpage. Additionally, if you have any further questions after the session, you're welcome to email yoursay@northsydney.newsouthwales.gov.au. So, moving on to the presentation. Just as a matter of context, Council's overall planning regime is established under the Local Government Act and what we refer to as the integrated reporting and planning. In essence, Council reviews or puts in place a community strategic plan and reviews that at the beginning of each term of Council. From that they deliver their initial delivery program, which is a 4-year program or 4-year plan as to what Council will endeavour to deliver over its term of Council, and how they will finance and resource that plan. And then on an annual year basis, we refine that in a lot more detail by actually outlining exactly what will be funded and delivered in a particular financial year of the 4-year term of Council. So, of course, we are now at the 4th and final year of the current term of Council, after it being extended by 1 year. So this will be the final operating plan and budget for this term of Council. As the new Council begins post-September of this year, we will review our community strategic plan, establish a new delivery program for the next 4 years, and the cycle will commence again. So where are we and where are we sitting at the moment? Sorry. In 2020 and 2021, what we will cover in this afternoon's presentation is the net operating result for the current financial year and the estimated result for the 21-22 financial year based on our current budget. The 21-22 financial overview will address some of the COVID-19 budget impacts, not only for that financial year, but some of the impacts that have been incurred in the past 2. We'll provide some detail on the draft revenue policy. We'll address changes to user charges and fees. We'll address the planned capital works expenditure, and we'll be quite specific on a number of key projects in that part of the presentation. And we'll talk briefly about the special rate variation funded projects. This year is the last year of the 3-year approved special rate variation. We'll address our key priorities and challenges in delivering on the budget, and we will also provide an overview of proposed allocation of community grants and subsidies throughout the financial year. So where are we? Just to set the context before I hand over to Darren to go through some of the more detail. Overall, Council's been aiming or achieving a net operating surplus before capital grants and contributions. We deliberately leave capital grants and contributions out because they can only be spent for capital purposes. So it's important that we meet all our ongoing or recurrent or operating costs from other sources of revenue. We aim to achieve a small surplus on that every financial year, because that small surplus allows us to supplement the capital grants or contributions that we receive from developers. They allow us to leverage council funds by applying for grants, and all other levels of government require council to put a certain percentage of its own money in to attract their grants. So it's essential that we have a small surplus that we can use to be able to leverage up and be able to apply for grants from other organisations. And you can see there in the 3 years leading into 30th of June 2019, we were sitting there with achieving surpluses of in the order of $5 to $7 million, which is around the target area that we aim for. 2019-20 saw a massive change with COVID occurring in March of 2020, and as a result of that, we suffered a loss before capital grants and contributions of $11.5 million in 2019-20. This year, there's a slight improvement in that as the economy improves and people start to return to their offices, but we're still estimating that we'll run a loss of $10 million, rounded off, for the financial year. And in 21-22, we'll return to what is shown there as a nominal small surplus. In fact, of that $5.27 million, that includes $5.47 million, which is an accounting entry to revalue our commercial property portfolio. And if we deduct that, then in reality, we're really at about a break-even point for the 21-22 financial year. So the trend has certainly been upward and recovering from COVID in 21-22, subject to what's actually experienced in the economy. We expect to effectively break even before, hopefully, all things working out well, we will move back to the surplus position we've seen in previous years. I think one of the things that's important to understand, though, is that in financing those deficits over the past 2 years, Council has had to draw down on its equity and reserves. And as a result of that, that does restrict or limit the funds that we have available for capital expenditure into the future over the life of the next 10-year financial plan. So that will be a significant impact. So I'll hand over to Darren here to go through some of the detail.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Looking at at a fairly high level at our forecast income statement for the current financial year and the next financial year, total income for next year is $126 million, and expenditure, total operating expenses, $120.8 million. As Ken's just mentioned there, the forecast operating result before capital grants and contributions for this year is $9.99 million, a deficit there. And for next year, we're forecasting a surplus of $5.27 million. And as Ken mentioned, if we take off the fair value adjustments next year, it's roughly a break-even result for next year. Adding on, we're getting some significant capital grants and contributions both this year and even more so next year, which will increase improve the operating result, including capital grants and contributions, to $2.3 million we're forecasting for this year and $28.8 million for next year. Oh, sorry, that's one. Breaking down the income section of the income statement, the greater majority by a significant margin of our income is derived from rates and annual charges. They contribute 47% of our total income from continuing operations. And then the next largest contributors are user charges and fees and capital grants and contributions. As far as expenditure goes, 39% of our expenditure is spent on employee benefits and on costs, and that's actually a little bit below the benchmark for local government. The reason for that is we deliver a significant amount of our services via contracts, and as a result of that, the materials and contracts line item is at 32% of our total expenditure, which is probably a bit higher than what a lot of other councils are. As Ken mentioned, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on our preparation for the budget for next year, and we're actually forecasting that it'll result in a $4.5 to $5 million detrimental impact on the operating result for next year compared to what we had forecast in the long-term financial plan. The previous iteration of the long-term financial plan assumed that the impact of the pandemic would be over by the 1st of July this year. That's not the case, particularly with respect to parking meter takings and property rental. So preparing the budget for next year, we've adopted a conservative approach, particularly to those revenue streams that are not yet back to pre-COVID-19 levels. And the most significant impacts are, as I mentioned, parking meter fees, which we're forecasting a $2.4 million reduction from what we had forecast in our long-term financial plan, property rental $1.6 million reduction, and outdoor seating rental $72,000 reduction. We're also incurring some additional expenses above what we had allowed for in our long-term financial plan for additional cleaning requirements of council facilities. That's $250,000 we've allowed for there. Looking at the draft revenue policy, that's a breakdown of the rating strategy for 2021. And if we look at the residential line item there, residential rates, 77% of our residential properties are subject to the minimum rate, which means that 77% of our ratepayers are contributing only 60% of our residential rate revenue. The other 23% are contributing the remaining 40%. And it's a similar situation with business rates. 34% of our business assessments or rates assessments are subject to the minimum rate, and the other 66% subject to provide the rest. There's a 60-40% split. 60% of our rate revenue is derived from residential rates and 40% from business rates. And those included in rates and annual charges is the levies that we're currently imposing, which is the infrastructure levy, the environmental levy. For those properties that are subject to them, the Crow's Nest and Neutral Bay Main Street levies, and also the domestic waste management charge and stormwater management charge. Pensioners may be eligible to a rebate. And as Ken mentioned, 21-22 next year is the third and final year of the current special rate variation. With user charges and fees, we apply the user pays principle as much as possible in order to reduce the revenue burden on ratepayers. All of our existing and proposed fees and charges are assessed according to the nature of the services provided. We've allowed for a general underlying increase of 1.5%, which is roughly in accordance with the estimated CPI for next year. The new fees are summarised in this table. And
And in essence, most of those new fees relate to changes with development and construction. You'll see there the work zone permit fees, for example, road closures fees, Section 88 certificates. So as much as possible, council tries to provide direct user charging on those that utilise council services or impact on the local government area, and to the maximum extent possible, thereby reduce the burden on residential ratepayers. So if we look over now to what we're doing with capital works expenditure, you can see there our total capital expenditure from 2017-18 through to 21-22. Prior to that, in the years prior to that, there were significant capital expenditures as council did significant works predominantly through the CBD. That reduced down to 2018-19 as we consolidated in the post-amalgamation era, if you like, after the decisions were made that North Sydney Council will continue as a standalone council in perpetuity. Subsequent to that, we've been moving forward with the delivery plan that council adopted. The big changes for 2021 and 21-22 are led by a couple of factors. The biggest one, of course, is the North Sydney Olympic Pool, which is now a $21 million project, sorry, a $23 million project, and that will that's had a significant impact on our overall capital expenditure. But as you can tell from that, we haven't reduced our effort in other areas at the same time that we've brought forward that large project. And the other thing that's had an impact on our capital work expenditure is we have been successful in obtaining significant additional capital grants. As the government has responded to COVID-19, they have provided funding for shovel-ready projects, and we've taken advantage of that. Primrose Tennis Court upgrade, which we'll talk about shortly, is an example. And there's been several others that we've been able to fund over and above the original delivery program, which is a good outcome for the community. I've already mentioned the North Sydney Olympic Pool redevelopment. The funding there of $48 million relates to the financial year. It is a $63 million project across the entire build. The $48 million relates to the funding associated with this particular financial year. There's $3.1 million allocated to road construction, $2.4 million for drainage works, and $1.9 million for footpath works. Now, this is capital expenditure. There is also across those, particularly roads, drainage and footpaths, along with stormwater pipes, etc. There's a significant amount of maintenance work that's undertaken. In fact, a significant higher dollars than what we've got there in the construction works. Some of the planned capital works expenditure for 21-22 is there's $1.75 million additional in this budget being allocated to stage 2 of the Hume Street Open Space Expansion project. I'll come back. We've had a question on that project, so we'll come back and address that at the end of the presentation. There's $690,000 for the cold loader shade structure, pop-up bar or events area, irrigation system replacement, and the Tunnel 2 resurfacing. Some money there for bus shelter replacement. As far as special rate variation funded projects, as I said previously, this is the third and final year of the special rate variation, which has raised a total of $71.1 million in funds, and they're allocated primarily to infrastructure renewal and improving the condition of essential community infrastructure. So projects fully or partially funded by the SRV in the next financial year include $1.65 million towards the further stages of the St Leonard's Park Master Plan. I'm sure many of our residents have seen the work that was undertaken in stage 1 directly out in front of the North Sydney Oval, and we've got the further stage taking place through the middle of the park at the moment. There's $2 million for the Neutral Bay and Cremorne village upgrades, They largely bring to conclusion the work that we've been doing along the Military Road corridor and the likes of Young Street and a range of works around those two villages. There's a $1 million allocation for Kirribilli and McMahon's Point Village upgrades. The master plan that we've put in place for both of those villages will take a significant number of years to address. That first amount allows us to do some early works. There's $300,000 for the Fred Hutley playground upgrade, another $300,000 for the Merritt playground upgrade, and there's $90,000 to the Gore Cove to Smoothie Park walking track, all from the SRV. As I've said previously, the North Sydney Olympic Pool Complex redevelopment is our largest project by far. Works are progressing well on that. There's a significant amount of demolition works that have been undertaken at the pool, and the bulk then of the reconstruction will take place during the forthcoming financial year. And hopefully, all things going well with the works and the weather, that project is due for completion in late 22, hopefully before the end of the swimming season in 22-23. We've undertaken design options to underground the multi-storey Halterman Street car park and create an urban park. That's been funded from $2.6 million from the state government, with a further commitment from the state government and from developers charged to complete that works, subject to the final detailed design and cost-benefit analysis. There's the access to the quarantine boat depot at Waverton, which many people will be pleased about. That's been a long worked at goal. So purchasing that parcel of land will allow the development of public access and better connectivity around that peninsula. And particularly with the ultimately Berries Bay reverting back to public ground post the construction of the second harbour tunnel, then that will, over the longer term, really develop that precinct. As I mentioned before, there's the upgrading of St Leonard's Park with the further part of the master plan, and this year we included funding for the St Leonard's Park playground, which is one of our major playgrounds. Primrose Park tennis courts refurbishment. In fact, the contract for that was signed today, and most of that works will take place into the new financial year. It's important to understand as we go into the next financial year that there's a number of risks and challenges. Like any budgets, they're based on estimates. Managing the COVID-19 impact remains a significant risk, as we've seen recently from Victoria. Whilst the economy is improving, while people are returning to work, and we're seeing greater business activity, and that has a significant impact on council's revenues from the likes of car parking fees, but also even our rental portfolio is impacted by that. COVID-19 remains a level of uncertainty, or creates a level of uncertainty within the economy. And supporting local business, of course, through that recovery is an important part for council, and in all our interests, of course, to get the CBD and businesses back up and running, hopefully as it was pre-COVID. On a positive note, we haven't seen any downturn of the amount of development activity and reconstruction happening through the city centre, and in fact significant progress was made. We took the opportunity while there were less people coming into the offices to get a significant amount of footpaths and streetscape works undertaken along Military Road and in the CBD. And another key challenge for 21-22 is addressing the raft of regulatory changes that are occurring across New South Wales at the moment. There's been significant reviews of planning policies and reform taking place. And there is a significant amount of work from council perspective in liaising with the state government agencies as they implement their large infrastructure projects that cross through North Sydney. So we've seen the impact of the metro development in recent years with the freeway, Warringah freeway upgrade taking place in the near future, and all the utility works that are happening in advance of that. We're seeing a lot of road closures around Alfred Street North, Ridge Street, and areas close to the freeway. And there is a significant amount of liaison occurring between council staff and officers from Transport for New South Wales with the aim to try to mitigate the impact on local residents. Moving on to some of the more community-related projects, Council delivers a lot of community and support through enabling and facilitating local community groups rather than direct delivery itself. So all of our community centres and community halls run under separate boards and are administered and managed by the community representatives that sit on those boards. Council provides a level of subsidy and support to make that happen. So the total cash subsidy for the community services in 21-22 is just over $1 million. That includes an amount of just under $30,000 for parent-run childcare, $130,000 plus for parking subsidies for the range of community groups, $560,000 to the community centres, $230,000 rounded as small group support. So that's broken into small grants for community organisations, or a large number of small grants. Additional subsidies we provide include $70,000 for trade waste removal to support some of those community entities, and $796,000 or just under $800,000 in building maintenance and rates payments, which we pay on behalf of those organisations. I think that the one comment I would like to close off with that is, if we look at that expenditure, I have to say our council and this community gets a great deal of benefit from the work a lot of our community members and volunteers and people that are willing to contribute to those community organisations, from the work that they do. Certainly for the amount of council funds that go into our community support programs, we get a great deal of a return and very good value for money through this approach in delivering community services. And council's rates, I think, in comparison to other councils, reflect that. So where are we from here? That's really a summary of the operational plan and budget for the next financial year. As I mentioned previously, the last financial year or last operating plan that will be adopted by this council. Early in the next term of council, we will again come back and review the community strategic plan. That's a long-term 10-year plus plan, so it's not a matter of rewriting it, it's a matter of refining it. Council will then establish its delivery program for the next 4 years, and again, then on a year-by-year basis, as we work through the delivery plan, we will produce and put on public exhibition our operational plan and budget on a year-by-year basis, and then report back to the community on that through our annual report. So that really brings to conclusion tonight's presentation, but we've had a number of questions that were sent in before tonight. I haven't been watching to see whether there's been any other questions that have come through. I'm sure that Jenny and Sarah will tell us shortly, but just some of the questions. There was a question that came in from one person that had accepted the invite to participate tonight regarding expecting rating changes for apartments and houses. And I think what that person was referring to was the rates review that was undertaken between 2016 and 2019 that looked at a whole raft of reforms, and including a lot of debate and consideration that went into whether unimproved or improved value should be used as the basis for rating. The arguments for capital improved value is that it would aim to reduce the discrepancy that occurs between strata titled lots and freestanding homes as far as who pays how much for rates. As at the end result of that was that the government did make a commitment to provide greater levels of flexibility. They've started to follow up on that with some regulatory change. However, they did not adopt the use of capital improved value rather than unimproved land value as the basis for the allocation of rates. So there hasn't been a significant change in equilibrium between the amount of money or amount of rates paid between strata properties and larger properties on larger lots. There was also a question with regard to Hume Street Park, and I know the person that raised that question. I won't mention him by name for his own privacy, but it's on the line. So just to explain Hume Street Park Stage 2, the slide that we've got up there shows the original proposal as to the breakdown of the stages. Stage 1 is the connection between Hume Street and Willoughby Road, where council bought 5 properties, 4 properties in that first section and then 1 property on the Willoughby Road side to construct a plaza that linked Hume Street Park to Willoughby Road. That stage 1 works is well underway. The demolition's taken place and the contractor's on site doing the construction at the moment. I can't remember off the top of my head when that works is due to finish, but I think it's prior to the end of this calendar year. The original stage 2 that was proposed in the master plan that was adopted back in September 2015 had a significant amount of works occurring over on Clark Street and even over on Albany Street and Oxley Street. A lot of that work's now going to be taken up by development that's in train along that corridor, including the overstation development from the Crow's Nest Metro site. So quite a bit of that, what was, if you like, the old stage 2 works is actually now being delivered by the developers that are constructing their developments along those roadways. Council has put forward a revised or an amended stage 2. And that amended stage 2 is really shown there in the light green section. So it provides a 2/3 closure of Hume Street between Clark and Pole Lane, and it allows the demolition of Kelly's Place Childcare Centre on Hume Street, so council can flatten and redevelop the parkland and make it more usable. So that revised stage 2 will ensure that we cover off the full connection, if you like, between Hume Street and the new plaza, which, as I said, will be completed by the end of this calendar year. And the other works that is occurring along Clark Street will largely be undertaken by developers as part of their development approvals to complete that stage. So the additional 1.75 million allocated in this year's budget, together with the funds that are already available for work on Hume Street Park, will fully complete that revised stage 2. Is there any further questions, Jenny or Sarah, that I need to be aware of? No? Thank you. So on that note, I'll hand back to Darren to wrap up, and thank you for your participation this evening.
Okay, yeah, thank you for joining us today. As Ken mentioned a little earlier, submissions close on the 22nd of June, and the final plans will be reported to Council on the 28th of June. Meeting for adoption there, in accordance with the statutory requirements that councils have adopted their next year's financial plans by June 30. the recording of this session this afternoon, and questions will be added to the webpage in the coming days. More information about the upcoming review of the Community Strategic Plan, the preparation of the next delivery program, will be available after the election in September.
Thank you very much.